So in this section we are going to continue with the GI motility. So this is second part of the topic. In this section we will discuss the movements of esophagus and stomach. So when we talk about the movements of esophagus, so movements of esophagus and movements of stomach. The movements, so esophagus, it shows only one type of movement, so which is called as peristalsis. So whenever we talk about peristalsis, we are basically talking about the movement of esophagus. Peristalsis is also showed by intestine, but esophagus, in case of esophagus, the main movement is peristalsis. Stomach, it shows different types of movements. So the movements of stomach can be classified into three types, which are also related to the functions of stomach. Okay, so the first movement is called as receptive relaxation. So this is related to storage function of stomach. Second type of movement is called as retropulsion, and this movement is related to the mixing and grinding function of stomach. And the last important movement of stomach is called as gastric emptying, and this is related to the emptying function of stomach, emptying of contents into the duodenum. We'll discuss these in detail. So first let us start with the movements of esophagus, that is peristalsis. Let us try to understand the peristalsis in detail. Okay, so again, these are different types of movements: receptive relaxation, retropulsion, and gastric emptying. Now we'll discuss the movement of esophagus, that is peristalsis, in detail. So if we talk about peristalsis, peristalsis can be divided into three types. So there are three different types of peristalsis. So peristalsis, which is the movement of esophagus, it can be divided into three types. So there is primary peristalsis. So we have the first type of peristalsis called as primary peristalsis, another is called as secondary peristalsis, and the last type is called as tertiary peristalsis. So we have primary peristalsis, secondary peristalsis, and tertiary peristalsis. If we talk about primary peristalsis, it occurs whenever there is, so primary peristalsis occurs whenever there is presence of food or bolus in the esophagus. So after swallowing, the bolus goes into the pharynx, and from pharynx, in the last part of swallowing, it goes into esophagus. The presence of food, it causes primary peristalsis in the esophagus, and this is a progressive type of peristalsis. That means it results in movement of bolus in the forward direction. Secondary peristalsis, on the other hand, it occurs whenever there is irritation of esophageal mucosa. It does not occur by the presence of food or bolus. It occurs when there is irritation of esophageal mucosa. So primary peristalsis, it is a physiological peristalsis which occurs as a physiological process when we are swallowing the food. And secondary peristalsis, it's also progressive in nature. That means if this peristalsis occurs, food is going to go towards the stomach, but it is not a physiological process because it occurs in due to irritation of gastric mucosa, and irritation does not occur normally. Okay, tertiary peristalsis, this is non-progressive peristalsis. It means the bolus is not going to go towards the stomach. In other words, this results in esophageal spasms. So esophagus is going to, the lumen of esophagus is going to close completely during tertiary peristalsis, and food is not going to progress in forward direction. So these are different types of peristalsis. Important things that we need to remember: in primary peristalsis, presence of food; secondary peristalsis, irritation of GI mucosa; in tertiary peristalsis, the esophageal spasm. And primary and secondary are progressive in nature, whereas tertiary peristalsis, it is non-progressive peristalsis. And primary peristalsis is physiological, whereas secondary peristalsis is not a physiological process. So these are different types of peristalsis that we need to know. Now let us try to understand the mechanism of peristalsis. Now we'll try to understand the mechanism of peristalsis. So let me draw a diagram for you. So let us say this is mandible, this is tongue, so this is trachea, and here is esophagus. So this is the maxilla. Okay, these are muscles of tongue. So after swallowing, this is bolus in purple color, it goes into the esophagus. Now whenever bolus goes into esophagus, as a result of peristalsis, it goes in the downward direction toward the stomach. Okay, so let us draw a magnified image of esophagus and let us try to understand what happens during the process. So this is bolus. So once this bolus goes into esophagus, this bolus, it causes stretch. Okay, so this is bolus, it goes into esophagus, and once it goes into esophagus, there is stretch. So it's a kind of mechanical stimulus in the wall of the esophagus because of this bolus. So this stretch, it causes release of a chemical neurotransmitter called as serotonin. So this stretch results in release of serotonin from the esophageal muscle, and this serotonin, it causes activation of a component of enteric nervous system, which is called as myenteric plexus. So release of serotonin. So here is another image. So because of bolus, there is stretch of the wall of esophagus, and this stretch results in release of serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter and which causes activation of myenteric plexus. Myenteric plexus is a component of enteric nervous system. So here is release of serotonin, this causes activation of myenteric plexus. Now this myenteric plexus, it performs two important functions. So first thing, that is, it causes activation of the part of esophagus which is present just before the bolus, and this is mediated through neurotransmitters acetylcholine and substance P. Acetylcholine and substance P. And another important function of myenteric plexus is that it inhibits the part of the esophagus after the bolus, and this is mediated through nitric oxide and vasoactive intestinal peptide. As a result, the segment of esophagus before bolus undergoes contraction, and the segment after food bolus undergoes relaxation. So because as a result of activity of myenteric plexus, the segment of esophagus before the bolus, it undergoes contraction, and this is called as retrograde contraction. So retro, because it's present before the bolus, this segment, so this is called as retrograde contraction. And again, as a result of myenteric plexus, the segment of esophagus present after the bolus, it undergoes relaxation, and this relaxation is called as anterograde relaxation. Antero because it's present after the food bolus, so this is called as anterograde relaxation. Now let us write different neurotransmitters which are involved in the retrograde contraction. The neurotransmitters which are responsible for retrograde contraction, these are acetylcholine and substance P. And for anterograde relaxation, we have obviously the inhibitory neurotransmitters. These are nitric oxide and vasoactive intestinal peptide, VIP. These are released by the neurons of myenteric plexus. The excitatory neurons release acetylcholine, substance P, and the inhibitory neurons, they release nitric oxide and uh, vasoactive intestinal peptide. So this is the mechanism of uh, the peristalsis. Again, this is food bolus. The It causes stretch causes release of serotonin causes activation of myenteric plexus, and myenteric plexus causes retrograde contraction and anterograde relaxation. As a result, bolus goes into in the forward direction, in progressive direction. So the main thing that we need to remember is stretch causes release of serotonin, and that serotonin activates myenteric plexus. Myenteric plexus causes retrograde contraction through stimulatory neurons, and through inhibitory neurons it causes anterograde relaxation. Okay, so this is all about peristalsis. Now let us move to the movements of stomach. Let us discuss movements of stomach. Before going to movements of stomach, let me diagrammatically give you some idea how this happens. So here is contraction, and in the lower part there is relaxation. As a result, I am going to draw the next diagram. So this is how it's going to appear. In the upper segment there is going to be contraction, so narrow part, and the lower part is dilated because of relaxation. And because of this contraction, bolus will be pushed forward, and the relaxed part is going to receive the bolus. So this is going to be change in position of bolus. So this shows how peristalsis is progressive in nature. Now let us discuss the movements of stomach. So in case of stomach, we have three different types of movements. So the first movement is called as receptive relaxation. Receptive relaxation. The second type of movement of stomach is called as retropulsion. Second type of movement is called as retropulsion. So first let us discuss receptive relaxation, then we'll go to other movements. So if this is esophagus, this is the greater curvature and lesser curvature of stomach. Okay, these are the curvatures of stomach, and here is pylorus and first and second part of duodenum. So once food, now we already know how food goes in the downward direction in esophagus. So once it reaches the lower part of esophagus, again there is stimulation of the wall of esophagus, there will be contraction. Now the food, it has to go into the stomach. As a result, now the proximal part of the stomach, the proximal part of the mid body of stomach is going to undergo relaxation. This is called as receptive relaxation. Why receptive? Because it receives the food, and this is also responsible for gastric accommodation of food. This food will go into the stomach, stomach will relax, so more food can be accommodated in the stomach. So it is responsible for storage function of stomach, the relaxation of the proximal part of mid body of stomach. So food is received by stomach as a result of receptive relaxation, and then it will be stored. So this is the first movement of stomach, that is receptive relaxation, and it is related to the storage function of stomach. The second type of movement of stomach is called as retropulsion. Now let us try to understand this retropulsion with the help of a diagram. So again I'm going to draw, this is esophagus lower part, this is the stomach, greater and lesser curvature, and here this narrow part of the stomach towards the duodenum is called as pylorus, and these are first, second and third parts of duodenum after pylorus. So now pylorus, so this is food present in the stomach. Pylorus, it remains contracted for some time. It means when the stomach contracts and tries to push the food forward, the pylorus is closed. So this food, it strikes the closed pylorus and then is reflected again in backward direction. And then again, because of contraction of stomach, this food hits the pylorus and is reflected in backward direction. So because of these movements, there will be mixing of food and there will be grinding of food particles. There will be mixing and grinding of food particles. Mixing and grinding of food particles. Now this retropulsion, why retro? Because food after hitting pylorus, it goes in backward direction. So retro, we use the word retro, and this is responsible for the mixing function of stomach, which is second important function of stomach, mixing of food. The third important movement of stomach, which is also a function of stomach, is called as gastric emptying. Gastric emptying simply means the contraction of the stomach, which results in movement of food from the stomach into the duodenum. Okay, now we'll discuss this gastric emptying in detail and the factors affecting gastric emptying. Okay, so if we talk about the functions of stomach, so we discussed three important functions of stomach. The first is called as the storage function of stomach, second is the mixing function of stomach, and third is the emptying or the gastric emptying. These are three important functions of stomach. Now let us move to the, now let us discuss the third important movement of stomach, that's gastric emptying. As we all can understand, gastric emptying simply means the movement of stomach which results in passage of food from stomach into the duodenum. Again, if this is stomach and this is duodenum, so movement of food from stomach into the duodenum, which is part of small intestine, is called as gastric emptying. So this is gastric emptying. Now why gastric emptying is an important topic is because there are different factors which cause increase in gastric emptying or decrease in gastric emptying, and we need to know those factors, and we also need to know which factor is important and which is not. Okay, so there are some factors which can cause increase in gastric emptying and there are factors which cause decrease in gastric emptying. So first let us discuss factors which cause increase in gastric emptying. So gastric emptying, whenever the volume of stomach increases or the contents in the stomach they increase, then automatically volume of stomach will increase. This will stimulate gastric emptying. So whenever stomach volume increases, the gastric emptying also increases. Hormone gastrin, it also causes increase in gastric emptying. Now we can remember it by a simple method. Gastrin has ion at the end, so ion stands for increased acid. So gastrin, not increased acid, it's actually inhibits acid production, and IN means it increases gastric emptying. So two important functions of gastrin, it IN means inhibits acid production and IN lets increases gastric emptying. Now there are different factors which cause decrease in gastric emptying. So let us first discuss the hormonal factor. There is a hormone which is called as cholecystokinin, CCK. It causes decrease in gastric emptying. And the second, which is most important factor regulating gastric emptying, it's called as enterogastric reflex. Now it's the most important factor regulating gastric emptying. Now what is enterogastric reflex? Let us try to understand. Okay, so in the duodenum, if we have presence of contents which include proteins, so in the duodenum if there is presence of proteins, if there is presence of fats, if there is presence of carbohydrates, so all these substances they cannot be absorbed directly, they need to be digested first. Or if there is presence of hyperosmolar solution in the duodenum, presence of proteins, fats, carbohydrates or hyperosmolar solution, it inhibits gastric emptying. It causes decrease in gastric emptying through a local reflex, and that reflex is called as enterogastric reflex. So it's not there is just the role of enteric nervous system, no role of sympathetic or parasympathetic nervous system. It's a local reflex. It is called as enterogastric reflex, and it is the most important factor regulating gastric emptying. So this was all about the movements of stomach. We have receptive relaxation, retropulsion, and gastric emptying, and they are related to different functions of stomach, that is storage function, mixing function, and again gastric emptying is also a function of stomach. So receptive relaxation, retropulsion, gastric emptying, and these are three important functions of stomach which we need to remember, and important factors regulating gastric emptying. Gastrin increases gastric emptying and CCK decreases gastric emptying, and enterogastric reflex is most important factor which decreases gastric emptying. So that was all about the movements of esophagus and stomach. In the next section we'll discuss about the movements of small intestine. Thank you. If you liked this video, then do share and subscribe.